The sirens echoed across the quiet lake, bouncing off the calm water like an unwanted warning bell. I stood on my own dock, arms crossed, watching two patrol cars pull up at the edge of the gravel road. The flashing lights painted the surface of the water in red and blue streaks, disturbing what had been a peaceful evening. All of this chaos, all of this noise because one woman decided I didn't belong on my own land. Her name was Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood homeowners association. She had been watching me ever since I moved into the cabin by the lake, making notes, taking pictures, even sending out letters demanding I pay membership dues. She had no clue that I wasn't just some newcomer she could bully into signing her HOA papers. That evening, as I cast my fishing line, she marched onto my dock with her clipboard, screaming about violations and lake rules. I calmly told her I wasn't part of her HOA and never would be. Her face turned crimson, her voice shook with fury, and before I knew it, she whipped out her phone and called the cops claiming I was trespassing on her lake. So now, here we were. 2 squad cars, 3 officers, neighbors whispering from their porches, and Karen standing tall with her arms folded, ready to see me dragged away in handcuffs. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the very land they lived on, including the lake she was so protective of, belonged to me. And tonight, as she prepared to humiliate me, the truth was about to hit her harder than anything she could have imagined. Because I wasn't just her neighbor, I was her landlord. When I first bought the cabin by the lake, all I wanted was peace. The place wasn't fancy, just a small wooden house tucked among tall pines, with a porch that looked out over still blue water. To me, it was perfect. I had spent years working in the city, grinding through long days, endless traffic, and constant noise. I wanted silence. I wanted to fish in the mornings, hear the crickets at night, and sit by a fire with no one telling me what to do. That's what this place promised. And for a little while, that's exactly what I got. But peace never lasts when someone like Karen lives nearby. The first time I met her, it was less of an introduction and more of a performance. I was unloading groceries from the back of my truck when she came striding down the gravel road. She wore a bright pink jogging suit, spotless white sneakers, and oversized sunglasses even though the sun had already dipped low. She carried a clipboard under one arm, like a teacher about to scold a misbehaving student. Without so much as a hello, she announced, "I'm Karen, president of the Lakeview Shores Homeowners Association." I nodded politely, though the title meant nothing to me. "Nice to meet you. I'm Mike. Just getting settled in." Karen looked at the cabin, then at me. Her lips pursed. "Yes, well, I wanted to catch you before you got too comfortable. You'll need to sign these." She shoved a stack of papers into my hands. They were thick, bound with a plastic clip, and filled with lines of rules written in tiny print. At the top, bold letters read, "Lakeview Shores HOA Covenants." "What's this?" I asked, flipping through the rules of our community. She said sharply, "Membership is mandatory. Dues are $200 a month, payable at the start of each quarter. That covers lake maintenance, community events, and ensures everyone follows the same standards. We like to keep our neighborhood beautiful." I set the packet down on the hood of my truck and met her gaze. "I appreciate the information, but my property isn't part of your HOA. I checked before buying." Her smile faltered, replaced by a tight look of annoyance. "That's impossible. Every house on this side of the lake is under our association." "Not mine," I said calmly. "This land's been in a separate parcel for decades. I've got the paperwork to prove it." Karen's jaw clenched. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if waiting for me to back down. When I didn't, she gave a little laugh that carried no humor. "Well, I'll let it slide this once. But you'll see, living here without being part of the HOA just isn't possible. Everyone follows the rules." She turned on her heel and walked away, her sneakers crunching against the gravel. I watched her go, uneasy but not overly worried. People like her existed everywhere, self-appointed bosses who believed the world needed their guidance. I figured she'd eventually lose interest and move on. I was wrong. The next week I came home to find a note taped to my door. In bold marker, it read, "Failure to pay HOA dues will result in fines." No signature, but I didn't need one. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. That night, while I sat on my porch sipping coffee, I noticed Karen standing across the street, arms folded, watching my cabin. She didn't wave, didn't smile. Just stood there as if guarding the neighborhood from an intruder. Over the following days, things escalated. She began walking the edge of my property, snapping photos with her phone. Once, when I grilled some fish I had caught earlier that morning, she shouted from the road, "Open flames are prohibited outside designated fire pits." I ignored her, enjoying my meal. Another time, she cornered me while I was carrying lumber for repairs. "Your siding doesn't meet HOA color standards," she snapped. "We only allow approved shades." I put the wood down and looked her in the eye. "Karen, I told you before, I'm not in your HOA. Your rules don't apply to me." Her face flushed red. "You think you're above the community? You think you can just do whatever you want? I think I can live on my land without harassment," I said firmly. She stormed off, muttering under her breath. For a while I tried to brush it off. Most of the neighbors were friendly. A retired couple down the road waved when they passed, and a young family with 2 kids brought over cookies to welcome me. They didn't seem to care about HOA politics, and I enjoyed talking with them. But Karen was relentless. She'd appear out of nowhere, shouting about trash cans left in the wrong place or grass being too long. One morning I found another note. This one said, "Final notice, join or face legal action." That was the day. I decided I wouldn't just ignore her anymore. I called a small meeting with the sheriff's office to confirm my property's status. They looked at my deed, nodded, and assured me that Karen had no legal control over me. I felt reassured, but I didn't know Karen wasn't the type to let go. If anything, being told no only made her angrier. One evening I was out on the dock, fishing rod in hand, enjoying the quiet ripple of water. The sunset painted the lake orange and purple, and for a moment, life felt perfect. Then I heard the sharp click of heels on wood. Karen. She marched right onto my dock without permission, waving her clipboard like a weapon. "That boat of yours hasn't been registered with the HOA," she barked. I sighed. "Karen, I don't need your permission to own a boat." "You're trespassing," she said suddenly. I turned to her, shocked. "Excuse me? This lake is under the authority of Lakeview Shores HOA," she declared. "By refusing to join, you're trespassing every time you step onto this water. I could have you arrested." Her words were so outrageous that I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Karen, I own this land. This dock is mine. The lake is part of the property parcel. You can't call me a trespasser on my own land." Her face twisted in fury. She jabbed her finger at me. "We'll see what the police think." She whipped at her phone and dialed 911 right there on my dock, her voice shrill as she reported an intruder refusing to leave private property. I sat back shaking my head, almost amused, but as I watched the flashing lights approach 20 minutes later, that amusement turned into something else. The cops were really coming. The neighbors were stepping out of their homes to watch. Karen stood proudly at the end of the dock, arms folded, convinced she had finally won. She had no idea that by calling the police, she wasn't exposing me, she was exposing herself. And that night would be the first time the truth began to unravel. The sound of sirens grew louder as the patrol cars rolled down the gravel road, their lights flashing red and blue against the darkening sky. I stood on my dock, arms crossed, trying to stay calm, though I could feel the weight of curious eyes from neighbors peeking through curtains and standing on porches. Karen was already at the roadside, her back straight and chin high like a soldier ready to present her case. She waved frantically at the police cars as if she had just caught a dangerous fugitive. When the first officer stepped out of the vehicle, Karen rushed to him before he had even closed the door. "That's him," she shouted, pointing straight at me. "That man is trespassing on our lake. He refuses to follow HOA rules, refuses to pay dues, and he's violating multiple community ordinances. I want him removed immediately." The officer glanced at me, then back at her. He was a tall man in his 40s with a calm expression, clearly used to people like her. "Ma'am, slow down. We'll handle this," he said, holding up his hand. Then he walked down the dock toward me. His partner followed, a younger officer with a notebook already out. "Evening," the older cop said when he reached me. "Mind telling me your side of the story?" I nodded. "Sure. My name's Mike. This is my property. I bought this cabin and the land it sits on. Karen seems to think I'm required to join her HOA, but legally I'm not. My parcel has never been part of their association." Karen stomped her foot on the gravel behind him. "That's a lie. Everyone in this community is under the HOA, everyone." The officer turned and gave her a steady look. "Ma'am, I'll get to you in a minute." Then back to me. He asked, "Do you have proof of ownership?" "Absolutely." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded deed I had started carrying after Karen's first threats. I handed it over. He took his time scanning the document, then showed it to his partner, who compared the address against his notes. The younger officer nodded. Karen's voice rose again, shrill with panic. "That doesn't matter. He still uses our roads, our lake, our facilities. He's trespassing." I spoke calmly, but loud enough for the watching neighbors to hear. "This road, this dock, and the section of lake I'm on are part of my parcel. I don't trespass on my own land. I'm not required to pay HOA dues because I don't belong to it. The sheriff's office has already confirmed this once." The officer folded the deed and handed it back to me. His face remained neutral, but his tone carried authority when he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, from what I see here, he's telling the truth. His property isn't covered by the HOA." Karen's jaw dropped. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air. Then she tried again. But that can't be. "The bylaws, ma'am," the officer interrupted firmly. "Bylaws only apply to members. You can't enforce HOA rules on someone whose land isn't part of the association." A ripple of whispers spread among the neighbors gathered nearby. Some had clearly believed Karen's claims about me, but now they exchanged surprised looks. Karen flushed red, her fists tightening around her clipboard. "You don't understand," she sputtered. "If he gets away with this, everyone will think they can ignore me, ignore the HOA. We'll have chaos." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "Chaos for sitting on his own dock?" I almost laughed at the absurdity, but I held it back. This wasn't the time to gloat, even if Karen was unraveling in front of everyone. The older officer sighed and adjusted his hat. "Ma'am, unless you have evidence that this man committed a crime, there's nothing more for us to do here." Karen's voice cracked. "He's disrespecting authority." "That's not a crime," the officer replied flatly. The crowd chuckled softly at that, and Karen spun around to glare at them. "You all think this is funny? If he ignores the rules, what's to stop the rest of you from tearing this community apart?" That question hung in the air, but the mood of the crowd had shifted. I could see it on their faces. Some were relieved, others amused, and a few even looked angry, not at me, but at her. It was dawning on them that her authority wasn't as absolute as she had led them to believe. I stepped forward then, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Karen, I didn't move here to fight with you. I came here for peace. I've respected your neighbors. I've kept my property clean, but you've been harassing me since the day I arrived. That stops now." Her cheeks flushed scarlet, and she jabbed her finger at me. "You'll regret this. You'll regret challenging me." The officer quickly stepped between us. "That's enough," he said firmly, giving her a warning look. "Ma'am, if you continue harassing him, he'll have every right to press charges. Consider this your warning." Karen's mouth opened as if she was about to argue, but the officer's stare froze her words in her throat. She turned abruptly and stormed back toward her house, her heels striking the gravel with angry force. The officers exchanged a look. Then the older one tipped his hat at me. "Sorry for the trouble, sir. Seems like a misunderstanding, but if she keeps this up, don't hesitate to call us." "I appreciate that," I said, shaking his hand. The patrol cars pulled away, and slowly the neighbors began to disperse, though I caught several pairs of eyes lingering on me, filled with curiosity. A few even nodded politely before heading home. Karen's house, meanwhile, glowed harshly with lights as she slammed her front door shut that night. As I sat on my porch listening to the frogs croak by the water, I thought about everything that had happened. The police had cleared me, yes, but I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her didn't give up just because they'd been proven wrong once. If anything, being humiliated in front of the neighborhood would only make her more dangerous. She had lost face, and she would find a way to try to take it back. The next morning, my suspicion was confirmed. I woke up to find another note shoved under my door. This one was longer, written in bold block letters. It read, "You may fool the police, but you can't fool the community. We will not tolerate freeloaders. Either pay your dues or face the consequences." The word consequences was underlined 3 times. I folded the note carefully and placed it on my kitchen table. I wasn't scared. Not exactly, but I was tired. Tired of the games, tired of the harassment, tired of someone trying to control me in my own home. And yet, beneath that frustration, there was a flicker of something else, a sense of irony. Because Karen, for all her threats about consequences, had no idea what cards I truly held. She thought I was just some stubborn man, refusing to play by her rules. She thought this was a battle between an HOA president and a homeowner. She had no clue of the truth that would eventually come crashing down on her. For now, though, I decided to wait. Sometimes the best strategy was to let people dig their own hole before you showed them just how deep it really was. Karen was already shoveling as fast as she could. All I had to do was let her keep digging. The lake was quiet that afternoon, the surface reflecting the blue sky like a mirror. I cast my fishing line and leaned back in my chair, feeling the tug of the line, the gentle pull of the water. But even in that peaceful moment, I couldn't shake the certainty that this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot, and when she came at me again, she'd come harder, louder, and more desperate than ever before. I took a deep breath, reeled in my line, and whispered to myself, "Let her try. The truth is on my side. She just doesn't know it yet." The morning after the police incident, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen would keep her distance. She had been embarrassed in front of half the neighborhood, and surely even someone as stubborn as her would need time to lick her wounds. But, if anything, the opposite was true. Losing face seemed to light a fire inside her, and from that day forward, she doubled down on her mission. It began with the neighbors. A few of them who had been polite with me before suddenly grew distant. The retired couple who used to wave at me when they drove past now averted their eyes. The young parents who once brought cookies no longer let their kids come near my dock. I could feel the shift like a cold wind blowing across the lake. Karen had gotten to them one evening as I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. I overheard 2 neighbors talking on the road. "Karen says he's freeloading," one whispered. "She says he's using the lake without paying, and that he's going to bring down everyone's property values." It stung, not because I cared what Karen thought, but because I could see how easily people swallowed her words. She was planting seeds of resentment, turning the community against me. That was her power, not the rules in her binder, but the influence she held over the people who lived under them. A few days later, I found another note taped to my truck windshield. "You are required to attend the next HOA meeting." It read in bold letters, "Failure to appear will be treated as an admission of guilt." I almost laughed at the ridiculousness of it, but a part of me grew tired of ignoring her. Sometimes, the only way to end a bully's game was to step right into the ring. So, The following Thursday evening, I walked into the community center where the meeting was held. The place was packed, neighbors sitting on folding chairs. Karen standing at the front like a preacher ready to deliver a sermon. She spotted me the moment I entered, and a triumphant smile spread across her face. "Ah, there he is," she said loudly, so everyone could hear. "Our guest of honor. The man who refuses to respect our community." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could feel the weight of their eyes, some hostile, some curious. I sat down in the back row, calm, waiting for her to finish her show. Karen launched into a long speech about responsibility, fairness, and community standards. She pointed at me more than once, painting me as the villain who thought he was above everyone else. She claimed I was taking advantage of the lake, refusing to pay my share, and setting a bad example for the rest. When she finally opened the floor, a man in the front row raised his hand. "Why doesn't he have to pay dues if the rest of us do? That doesn't seem fair." Karen seized on the question. "Exactly. That's what I've been saying. He hides behind technicalities, but this community can't survive if freeloaders drag us down." I stood then, my voice steady. "I'm not hiding behind anything. I own my land outright. My parcel has never been part of this HOA. That's not a loophole. That's the law." Karen cut me off before I could continue. "See how arrogant he is. He doesn't care about us, about our rules, about what's best for the neighborhood." But then something unexpected happened. An older man near the middle raised his hand. His face was lined, his voice gravelly. "Karen, I've lived here 20 years. I've never seen his property on the HOA maps. Maybe he's telling the truth." Murmurs spread again, this time not entirely in Karen's favor. She stiffened, her smile faltering for just a second before she regained her composure. "Even if that's true, he still uses our roads and benefits from our lake. He owes us something." I took a step forward, my gaze sweeping the room. "Let me be clear. I don't owe Karen or this HOA a single dime. And if you're worried about the lake, maybe you should ask who really owns it." Karen's face twisted, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear. She knew I was holding back something, and it rattled her. I didn't reveal everything that night. It wasn't the time. Instead, I walked out calmly, leaving the room buzzing with questions. Behind me, I could hear Karen shouting to regain control, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The days that followed were quiet, but not in a good way. I noticed Karen driving past my property more often, her car slowing as she scribbled in her notebook. Once, I caught her peering through binoculars from across the lake. It was invasive, almost desperate, like she was searching for anything she could use against me. Then came the letter. Unlike the handwritten notes before, this one was official looking, typed and printed on HOA letterhead. It accused me of violating community agreements and demanded I pay $1,200 in back dues immediately or face legal action. I chuckled when I read it, but I also felt something else. Resolve. Karen wasn't just playing games anymore. She was escalating into threats she couldn't possibly enforce, and if she wanted to push this into legal territory, maybe it was time I stopped holding back. That night I opened the old lockbox where I kept my most important documents. Inside was the deed not only to my cabin, but to the entire tract of land surrounding the lake. It had been in my family for generations, leased out in sections to developers who built the neighborhood. Every house, every street, every patch of lawnette, all sat on land owned by me. Karen's HOA had authority over landscaping and mailboxes, sure, but not over the ground beneath their feet. In short, I wasn't just her neighbor, I was her landlord. For years, I had kept that quiet. I liked my privacy and saw no reason to lord it over anyone. But Karen was forcing my hand. She had built her entire sense of power on the idea that she ruled this community, and she had convinced everyone else of it too. They had no idea that their queen was nothing more than a tenant. As I stared at the documents spread across my kitchen table, I realized something. If Karen wanted a fight, she was about to lose it in the worst way possible. Not because I was louder, not because I was meaner, but because the truth was a hammer and it was time to bring it down. Still, part of me hesitated. I didn't want to humiliate her for the sake of it. I didn't enjoy conflict, and I hadn't moved here to play power games. But Karen wasn't going to stop until I put an end to it. And sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to show them just how small they really were. The following week, the HOA scheduled another meeting, this time specifically to address the issue of non-compliance. Karen clearly wanted to make an example out of me. I decided that would be the night I revealed the truth. In the days leading up to it, I kept to myself. Karen paraded around the neighborhood, gathering signatures on a petition to remove me from the lake. I didn't interfere. I didn't even argue. Let her build her case. The higher she climbed, the further she would fall. On the evening of the meeting, I put the deed and lease agreements into a folder and slid it under my arm. As I walked down the road toward the community center, neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, whispering. I could feel the tension in the air like a storm about to break. Karen was already at the front when I arrived, smiling smugly as she clutched her petition. She thought tonight would be her triumph, the night she rid the neighborhood of the man who defied her rules. But what she didn't know was that tonight would be the night everything changed. The community center was packed that night. Folding chairs filled the room, neighbors squeezed shoulder to shoulder, their voices buzzing with curiosity. Some were clearly on Karen's side, arms crossed and faces stern. Others looked uncertain, whispering to each other as they glanced between me and the front of the room. At the center of it all stood Karen, clipboard in hand, dressed in a sharp blazer as if she were running for office. She beamed with confidence, waving her petition like it was a royal decree. When she spotted me at the door, her smile widened, but not with kindness. It was the grin of someone who believed victory was already hers. "Well, look who finally decided to face responsibility," she said loudly, her voice echoing across the room. Heads turned toward me. Karen thrived on attention, and tonight, she had it all. I walked slowly to the front, carrying the folder tucked under my arm. I didn't say a word as I passed the rows of staring neighbors. Some gave me sympathetic nods, while others glared as though I was some kind of criminal. I could feel the tension pressing in like heavy air before a storm. Karen raised her hands. "Dramatically, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we gather to address the cancer threatening our community. One man," she pointed her pen at me, her eyes blazing, "believes he is above the rules. He refuses to pay dues, refuses to respect our standards, and worst of all, he flaunts his defiance openly. If we allow this behavior, what kind of example does it set for the rest of us?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. She had them worked up, feeding on their frustration. A man in the front row shouted, "Yeah, it's not fair." And Karen smiled, soaking it in. "Exactly," she said. "This community thrives on fairness and unity. Without the HOA, we would have chaos. And tonight, we must decide. Will we let this man tear apart everything we've built, or will we stand together?" The room erupted in claps and cheers from her supporters. She looked around proudly, then turned back to me. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. "Yes, I have plenty to say." The room grew quiet. Every eye turned to me, every ear waiting. I held up the folder in my hand. "You've heard Karen's version of the story. Now it's time you hear the truth." Karen laughed sharply. "Truth? Don't waste our time with excuses. We all know." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the deed to my property. It clearly shows my land is not, and has never been, part of the Lakeview Shores HOA. That means your rules, your dues, your so-called bylaws, none of them apply to me." The older man who had spoken up at the last meeting leaned forward, squinting at the papers. A few people whispered. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Technicalities. He's hiding behind loopholes." I shook my head. "No loopholes, legal fact. I've confirmed it with the sheriff's office. I own my land outright, independent of the HOA." Karen's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Even if that's true, you still use our roads, our lake. You benefit from what the HOA maintains." And that was when I dropped the hammer. I pulled out the second document, laying it flat on the table for everyone to see. "This," I said, my voice carrying across the room, "is the master deed for this entire tract of land. Every street, every lot, every house, including Karen, sits on land owned by me." Gasps filled the room. The neighbors leaned forward, their eyes wide, trying to process what I had just said. Karen froze, her eyes darting to the papers as if they might burst into flames. I continued, steady and deliberate. "Your homes exist here because decades ago, this land was leased out to developers. The HOA manages things like trash pickup and lawn standards. Sure, but the ground under your feet, that belongs to me. So when Karen accuses me of freeloading, she's conveniently forgetting one small detail. She, along with every one of you, pays rent directly or indirectly to me. I'm not just her neighbor. I'm her landlord." The room erupted in noise, shocked gasps, murmurs, even a few laughs. People turned to each other, whispering furiously. Karen's face went pale, then red, then pale again, like a storm cloud, trying to decide whether to pour or explode. That's not true," she stammered, her voice cracking. "He's lying. He forged those papers." I calmly slid the documents across the table to the nearest neighbor, an older woman who immediately adjusted her glasses and began reading. "No forgery," I said. "County records match. You can verify it yourself tomorrow at the clerk's office." The older woman gasped softly and passed the paper to the person next to her. Within minutes, the folder was making its way around the room, each set of hands trembling slightly as they flipped through the proof. By the time it came back to me, the entire mood of the room had shifted. Karen tried to rally, her voice desperate. "Now you don't understand what this means. If he owns the land, then he controls everything. He can raise our rents. He can evict us. He can evict us. He can destroy our community." Her panic only made her look weaker. People were no longer nodding along. They were frowning, whispering about why she had never mentioned this before. Why she had spent years lording over them while hiding the fact that she was no more powerful than anyone else, less even. I raised my hands, calming the room. "I've lived here quietly. I never planned to say any of this. I just wanted peace. But Karen pushed this fight, and now you all deserve to know the truth. I have no intention of changing your leases, raising your costs, or interfering in your daily lives. I want nothing more than to enjoy my cabin and the lake in peace. But what I won't tolerate is being harassed, threatened, or treated like an outsider on land that has been in my family for generations." Silence followed. My words, heavy and final. Then, slowly a man in the front row clapped. Another joined him, then another. Within moments, the room erupted not with anger, but with applause. People turned toward me, some smiling, some nodding, many looking relieved. They had been trapped under Karen's thumb for so long, and now they realized she wasn't the queen she pretended to be. Karen, meanwhile, stood frozen, her eyes darting wildly as if searching for an escape. Her hands shook as she gripped her clipboard, and for the first time since I met her she looked small, powerless. "This meeting is adjourned," I said firmly, closing the folder and tucking it under my arm. "From now on, I expect the harassment to stop. Live your lives, enjoy your homes, but leave me out of your HOA squabbles." And Karen, I paused, meeting her eyes. "If you ever try to threaten me again, remember this: I don't answer to you, you answer to me." The words hit her like a blow. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The room was buzzing now, not with anger, but with relief, even excitement. Neighbors crowded around me as I left, some apologizing for doubting me, others thanking me for finally standing up to her. By the time I stepped out into the cool night air, Karen was still standing at the front of the room, silent, defeated, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. Her empire had collapsed in a single evening, and she knew it. I walked home under the stars, the weight that had hung over me for weeks finally lifting. For the first time since moving to the lake, I felt true peace, not just from the quiet water or the whispering pines, but from knowing the truth was finally out. Karen's reign was over, and though I hadn't sought this battle, I knew one thing for certain: she would never forget the night she tried to evict me from her lake and discovered I was her landlord all along. The night after the confrontation with the police was quiet, but it carried a strange heaviness in the air. I sat on the porch of my cabin, sipping coffee as the moonlight reflected off the calm lake. The water was still, but I knew Karen was not. She had been humiliated in front of the very neighbors she claimed to rule over, and the realization that she wasn't just powerless over me but actually dependent on me was a wound to her pride she wouldn't heal from eyes. Yet, I also knew this was the end of her reign. The neighbors had seen the truth, the police had confirmed it, and the documents I had shown left no doubt. The land, the lake, the roads, all of it, were mine. The next morning, I woke to find an odd silence in the neighborhood. Usually, by sunrise, Karen would be pacing the shoreline with her clipboard or barking orders at some unlucky neighbor about their grass height or fence color, but this morning, nothing. Even the neighbors seemed quieter, more watchful. It was as if the whole community was holding its breath. I went about my day as usual, fishing off the dock, fixing the porch steps, and minding my own business. But by evening, a knock on my door broke the calm. It was a group of neighbors, people I had barely spoken to before because Karen's presence always hung like a shadow over every conversation. There were 6 of them, standing awkwardly with hesitant smiles. "We just wanted to thank you," one man said, scratching the back of his neck, "for standing up to her. None of us dared." Another woman, holding her toddler on her hip, added, "She's been running this place like a dictatorship for years. We thought we didn't have a choice, but you showed us something." I invited them in, and soon my cabin filled with laughter, conversations, and a sense of community I had never felt since moving in. They told me stories of Karen's overreach, fines for flower beds that weren't uniform, warnings for leaving a kayak too close to the shore, even threatening letters about holiday decorations. They had all feared her because they thought the HOA had ultimate authority, but now they knew the truth. She had no authority at all. The days that followed revealed just how far Karen had fallen. She no longer patrolled the streets with her clipboard. The proud smirk she once carried had been replaced with a scowl, and she avoided eye contact with me and most of the neighbors. But that didn't mean she gave up. One afternoon, I saw her standing on her porch, phone pressed tightly to her ear, voice raised in anger. She was still fighting, still clinging to some shred of control. Word spread that she was calling county officers, attorneys, and anyone who would listen. She wanted to find a loophole, some way to regain her power. But there were no loopholes. My family had owned the land long before her subdivision was even built. The developers had signed long-term leases for the plots, leases that I now owned. The HOA wasn't sovereign, it was just a tenant, and its authority extended only as far as I allowed. Her desperate attempts only backfired. The county confirmed that her complaints had no legal standing, and the neighbors, now emboldened, began openly defying her so-called rules. Lawn ornaments popped up overnight, kayaks dotted the shoreline, and one man even repainted his house a bold shade of red, something Karen had once banned outright. Watching all this unfold, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. Karen had built her entire identity around control, around being the one everyone feared and obeyed. Now, she was powerless. She avoided community events, and the few neighbors who still visited her returned shaking their heads. She had become isolated, her empire of rules reduced to nothing more than a stack of useless papers. One evening, as I was locking up my shed, Karen approached me. Her steps were hesitant, her face pale. For the first time, there was no arrogance in her eyes, just exhaustion. "I don't understand," she said softly, almost to herself. "All these years I ran this place. Everyone listened. Everyone obeyed. And then you ruined it." I looked at her calmly. "I didn't ruin anything, Karen. I just showed the truth. You've built your power on fear, not authority. That never lasts." Her lips trembled as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she turned and walked away, shoulders slumped. It was the last time she tried to confront me directly. In the months that followed, life by the lake changed completely. The neighbors became friends instead of strangers. Cookouts replaced tense HOA meetings, and instead of fines, we shared tools, food, and laughter. Children played freely without worrying about being too loud. The lake, once a symbol of Karen's control, became what it was meant to be, a place of peace and community. Karen, however, faded into the background. Some said she tried to resign from the HOA, while others whispered that she was trying to sell her house. But no one feared her anymore, and that was enough. She still lived there, but she was no longer the queen. As for me, I found something I hadn't expected. I had come to the lake to enjoy solitude, to escape from noise and conflict. But in standing up to Karen, I had found a new kind of peace that came not from isolation but from belonging. The neighbors no longer saw me as an outsider. They knew me as the one who had broken Karen's grip, and more importantly, as the landlord who respected their freedom. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had called the cops to have me removed, only to learn that she was living on my land. She wanted me gone, but instead, she lost everything she had built. The lake taught me a lesson too, that sometimes, standing firm and quiet is all it takes to expose the truth. 1 year later, I stood on the dock as the summer sun set, watching families swim and laugh in the water. The lake sparkled in gold and orange hues, and for the first time since moving in it felt like home. Karen's shadow no longer hung over us. The HOA still technically existed, but it was nothing more than a formality, powerless and irrelevant. The cops who had come that night sometimes patrolled the area, giving me a knowing nod when they passed. Even they had spread the story, a cautionary tale about what happens when someone tries to abuse power without realizing who truly holds the ground beneath their feet. And as I cast my fishing line into the water, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had tried to make me feel like a trespasser, but in the end, she had learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't control the landlord. If you enjoyed this shocking story, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. Stay tuned to Bright Reality, where unbelievable real-life stories come to life.